But franchising does make it much more doable. If you've got a good manager, you align your incentives, and that franchisor can carry a lot of the daily support water for you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Process Lab. Today, I'm excited to have Jon Ostenson on the line. Hi, Jon.
Hey, Sam. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Jon Ostenson is the founder and CEO of Franbridge Consulting, an Inc. 5000 company, and ranks among the top 0.1% of franchise consultants. He's also the best-selling author of Non-Food Franchising. With a background as a former Inc. 500 franchise president and a multi-brand franchisee, Jon leverages his extensive experience to guide clients in making informed franchise investment decisions. A sought-after expert, Jon regularly contributes to major publications like Forbes Inc. and Bloomberg on franchising topics. And with that, today on the Process Lab, where we talk about everything process, we're going to actually talk about, from the expert himself, how one might contemplate a franchise and what that process might look like. So before we just jump into that, Jon, I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about what you're doing today and give the audience a little bit of background on what is franchising for those who might not be familiar.
Absolutely. Like so many of your listeners, I spent many years in the corporate world and never had franchising on my radar. But it was about 9 years ago that I made the jump and became president of Shelf Genie franchise system and really fell in love with the franchise model through that, and have since invested in franchises myself. And I now spend most of my time playing connector. So I'm essentially a real estate broker, but for franchises. So the beauty of our model is, we work with over 600 different franchise companies that are looking to grow, that still have good markets to expand into across a variety of different industries. But it's entirely free to work with us. We simply get a referral fee from the brand on the back end, and none of that's passed on to our clients. So the way we help clients would be getting to know them, getting to know a little bit about their background, what they're looking to do, their financial situation, and then introducing them to the top available opportunities in their market and kind of holding their hand through the process, which I know we'll dig into a little bit more here.
That's great. So it sounds like your model is fantastic. It really reduces the barriers for people to engage with you. And it sounds like they don't even have to have a franchise in mind. It sounds like you're going to actually consult them on the opportunities in their area.
Yeah, over 90% of our clients end up choosing an opportunity in an industry that was never even on their radar. So, there's just so much noise out there in the market today. If you were to Google around and you find a top 100 franchise list from this publication, most of those companies are actually paying to be on that list. And so it's hard to really understand fact from fiction and what's going on behind the scenes. And that's where we come in, just with rich history in franchising. We've got the relationships, and franchising is just like any industry. There are good players, really strong ones, and then there are ones that aren't as strong, that you don't want to align with, that aren't worth the value that you're essentially paying back in the form of a royalty. So that's where we come in to really help our clients find the best of the best.
Okay, awesome. And then before we jump into the actual process of making the jump, and again, we're going to talk about, if I'm a salary man today, how do I actually transition over to being a franchise owner? Is there a particular profile, though, of person who this is a better fit for than not? Who is the right candidate who would make that jump?
Yeah, I'd say what we see, most of our clients are in their 30s to 50s. Certainly we have some in their 20s and 60s, but 30s to 50s would kind of be the sweet spot. Most oftentimes it's someone that, has been in the corporate world or run their own business, but they say, hey, I'm ready to make that jump. I want to become a business owner and don't know what that looks like, don't know how to connect the dots. But I'm tired of building someone else's empire. I've been grinding for all these years. I'm ready to build my own empire and leave a legacy for my kids and, eventually get to time freedom. It takes work. I never want to sugarcoat that. It takes work, but you have that goal in mind. And so, I get those calls multiple times every day. But then we also have some clients that say, hey, I've been running my own business for a while. I'm now looking to expand, maybe diversify from what I'm currently doing, or complement what I'm currently doing in some cases. And they say, I remember all the hard work that went into launching my first business. I would much rather start on third base, essentially, with franchising, where a lot of things have already been figured out. And I'm essentially handed a playbook, and I've got a coach on the sidelines, and I can just step in and go execute. So I'd say those are the two most common that we work with, but you definitely have a lot of exceptions as well.
Got it. Okay, well, with that, let's just launch in, because we have a short time to really pick your brain on this. So let's say we work with you, or we find another franchise opportunity. What does the process look like in transitioning into a franchise?
Yeah. And so that first off, there's two, I should have hit on this with the profiles. There's two different types of owners in franchising. There's what we call owner operator, and there's also semi-absentee. Some call it semi-passive, some call it an executive model. And especially owner operators, when you're jumping in, running the business yourself. The other is, hey, you're putting a manager in place day one. So maybe you even keep your day job and you're managing the manager. Now, the success of that and the ramp up really comes down to having a good manager that you align interests with. But it can be done. A lot of our clients do that. So those are kind of the two profiles. But where do you start? So I'll just kind of talk about how we work with clients because I think it's by far the best approach. You reach out and we get to know each other. We jump on a call or two, have you fill out very high level profile. And then I come back to you with, hey, if I were in your shoes, Sam, in the Richmond, Virginia market, as an example, here are the top 12 available opportunities in your market across different industries, different price points, different roles that you might play in the business. But if I were in your shoes, knowing what you've shared with me, here are the ones that I would personally want to be looking at. Your goal would be to narrow those 12, give or take, down to maybe 3 or 4 to then have a conversation with. We make those introductions. You may get off the phone and say, hey, John, that one's definitely not for me. But oftentimes there's 1 or 2 that you say, wait a minute, that one's a lot more interesting than you made it sound in the beginning. And so it can be an iterative process. We can always bring other opportunities back in. But what I found is when you start having real conversations with real companies, that's when you start to crystallize in your mind the characteristics you like in a business and the things that could work for you. And, after one of those calls, you'll probably look at your spouse and say, this really has potential. And so from there, there's a process that the franchises will take a candidate through where typically they'll do an introductory call. Next, they get into the financials on the next call. It's what they call unit economics. Then they get into, on the next call, maybe mapping territories and looking at the FDD, the franchise disclosure document, which is a big old document with all the history of the franchise. You'll then get a chance to talk to other owners in their system, so other franchisees, and hear about their experience. Really, the goal is to get you as much information as possible, eventually leading up to what's called a discovery day. And that's where they would fly you into their home office for a day or two. You get to know the team, make sure it's good culture fit, get all of your questions answered. And all throughout this process, I'm happy to jump on touch-based calls with my clients. It can be a sounding board. And like I said, we can iterate and bring in other opportunities as you start to self-discover what could be a good fit for you. We've got funding partners that we can pull in to support you, franchise attorney that can review the agreement for you. We even have a recruiting partner if you wanted to use them to find key personnel for the business. So it's kind of a one-stop shop that we've created to really make it easy, because most people come to us and say, hey, we don't know the first thing about franchising other than the basics. And they start rattling off a couple of food brands. And I say, oh, but there's so much more. There are all these other types of opportunities too. So we really help them kind of soup to nuts through the process.
That's amazing. And a few questions there, just based on what you just went through. One is the non-food aspect. So just tell us a little bit why you decided to go that way and why food-related franchises have been excluded, at least from your model.
Yeah. Well, first off, we love the food guys. We support them. We need them. So, nothing negative there. But my humble belief is there are easier ways to make money. There are opportunities out there that require fewer employees, less operating hours, maybe less capital investment, higher margins because you don't have food waste, in that case, that may be less susceptible to consumer whims. I think about frozen yogurt. It was froyo was big until it wasn't. So I don't like things that are trendy. Oftentimes we work with businesses that may be non-sexy or just businesses that aren't going to go out of style, things that people will always spend on regardless of the economy. AI is not going to totally eliminate most of the types of companies that we work with. And so in turn, it's industries like home and property services, health and wellness, categories like kids, pets, seniors, again, things that people will always spend on, where we see good macro trends behind them. And, for the long term, that's really the theme of what our clients are looking for.
Okay. So a lot of it just sounds like about volatility and really trying to create stable offerings for your clients where they can be in it for a good amount of time.
Exactly. And, by cutting out literally half of the market by not doing food, it allows us to go much deeper with these other opportunities. We're not trying to be everything to everybody. We also don't work with car washes. We don't work with self-storage or hotels. Those are so institutionalized from a capital standpoint. It's not the ball game that our clients would be a good fit for.
Okay. That's great context. And then the other part I wanted to ask about, it sounds like your process makes it really easy for people to jump into, but the financing aspects of it. You mentioned there's financing options, but what are we, for somebody who knows nothing about it, what should we even be ballparking our mind? What's usually the capital you kind of need to bring to the table to consider some of these opportunities?
I'd say about half the opportunities we work with are customer facing retail, where you would have a build out, kind of what comes to mind when you think franchise. The other half are more service based, think in-home senior care, youth soccer, insulation, flooring, paint. Like those are things that don't require that build out. So you can get in at a lower investment, also ramp up faster. And so I'd say on average, we just had clients that bought 10 trampoline parks the other day at 3.5 million each. It can get really big. Most people are jumping in where if you look at the franchise fee and the startup costs and several months of working capital all built in, you're between 150,000 and 400,000, somewhere in that ballpark. Again, that's all in investment. And some people are using cash. The vast majority like the idea of leveraging. SBA loans are the common approach there. And so we work with banks that do a lot of franchise lending, and banks love franchises because it's much more predictable, right? They really love the franchise model. So oftentimes it may look like you're putting in 50,000, 60,000 of cash and then using an SBA loan to fund the rest. Obviously the interest on that is tax deductible. You can always pay it back early as well. Some others that we work with like the idea of using a retirement plan. So if you have a 401k from a previous employer, you can roll that over through what's called the ROBS program, ROBS, and actually set up the business as a C corporation, buy the business with the retirement plan, pay yourself a salary. Some people will use the retirement plan program in conjunction with an SBA loan. Some people will use HELOCs. We work with a lot of clients that invest in real estate. Probably 2/3 invest in real estate too, which I personally do. I think it's an all of the above approach. You've got the passive income, you've got the active income, tax benefits on both sides. So anyway, going a little long-winded here on the answer, but I'm trying to paint the picture that there are different options out there. I'd say SBA loans are probably the most common.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think this is the level of practical detail that makes this very approachable. So it sounded like you said a lot of options are that 150 to 400 range, and you can get bank financing. So how much money are people usually, let's say in that range, have to bring to the table? It sounds like the barrier must be pretty low, but I just want to confirm, like, what would be, if I'm going to get like even financing from a bank, do I need like to bring 50 to the table, 100 to the table? Like what's the actual, pay to play here?
Yeah, I'd say between 50,000 and 100,000 of cash is where most people are injecting. And then that gives the bank comfort to make the loan.
Okay. And then my mind is abuzz because then when you talked about the passive almost model where you can find a manager versus the one where you jump in, but I guess those are going to be two different processes. I guess picking, or maybe they're not so different, but I guess my next step is I've got the money, I've got the interest. And if I'm working with somebody like you, I have all these options that are given to me, right? That I can align my interests to. What's next if I'm transitioning, let's say again, into this space? What's the timeline? How long does it take to get set up? I have these interviews. It sounds like there's a dating period with a particular franchise owner. And then what does the next 6 months look like?
Yeah, I'd say if we start the clock from that first conversation with the franchisor, so you say, hey, John, I want to talk to these 3 companies. If we start the clock with that first conversation, from that point to the point of signing the franchise agreement and funding, typically is around 60 days. We have some clients that will move as fast as 30 to 45 days. It just depends on their schedule in most cases. The franchisor is usually pretty flexible. Some clients do take longer, but I'd say on average, right about 2 months. And from there, if it's a brick and mortar retail based business, there's going to be site selection. There's going to be build out. Again, the franchisor doesn't expect you to have any of that background. They're hand holding the whole process. They've got preferred vendors that can do all of that for you. You still make the call, but so that would be a little bit longer. That might take, call it 3 to 9 months to be up and running from that point. But if it's a service-based business, like so many that our clients do work with, there isn't any site selection. There might be some hiring. There's going to be some upfront marketing that the franchisor starts running in your market for you. If you're looking to move fast, you could be up and running as fast as, call it two months later. So again, this can happen quickly. A lot of, but if you say, hey, I need time to leave my job, I'm expecting a big bonus next fall, the franchisor is usually pretty flexible around the timeline.
Yeah. And within that, like two, it sounds like the almost 9-month timeline, depending on what the infrastructure build out is. Is there training? How does one go from, or is that something that you're vetted for? How much experience do I need as like a business owner / operator to kind of jump into this?
Yeah, a franchisor would fully train you. There are some franchises that say we do need a background in that space. The vast majority don't. I'd say
Mhm.
skill sets are much more focused on. So, a lot of our clients have sales in their background. That's a great background for franchising. And, there's so many things you can do with that. Some of our clients say, hey, we don't want anything to do with sales. That's not our personality. We want to be in the background. Well, their first key hire is going to be a salesperson, right? And within the franchise system, they're going to train around and help you kind of staff your team around what your skill sets are, what you're looking to do in the business. A lot of our clients will start out running the franchise with the goal of replacing themselves over time and then acquiring another franchise or expanding to more locations. Or others say, hey, I want to start out, I want to keep my day job, put a manager in place. And then once the business is at a certain level, I'll make the jump and jump into it. I always want to make this point. While that semi-passive model, executive model is very common in franchising, and I'd say probably half of our clients go that route.
Mhm.
I never want to sugarcoat it. It still takes a lot of work. It still takes a little more time than you think. If it was easy, everybody would be a business owner, right? So it does take more work than some of these passive investments that you may be investing in real estate syndications and in the public markets and stuff. But franchising does make it much more doable. If you've got a good manager, you align your incentives, and that franchisor can carry a lot of the daily support water for you. They've got a team that's supporting that manager. They're answering their questions. You're still making some big decisions, but they're doing a lot of that day-to-day grind on your behalf. And so if you have a good manager and a good franchisor, it makes it very doable. And we have countless case studies of clients that have gone that path.
Okay. And it sounded like in terms of hiring a good manager and hiring staff in general, the franchise owners are typically offering recruiting support or they help you staff. Like for those of us who don't have much, let's say HR experience or interviewing experience, is that part of the model build out?
I'd say it's kind of a tag team. Ultimately, the decision will still be on you. And I'd say the onus falls on you to bring in the right person. But the franchisor, in a lot of cases, is willing to have an interview with, you tee up a candidate. They say, hey, we're happy to jump on the phone, make sure it's a good fit. You learn so much from other franchisees in the system too. Again, you've got a community. So you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, to be cliche. You've got all these other owners that have been there, done that, running the same business in their markets. Lean into them, build some relationships there, and you'll glean a ton of knowledge. Where did they find their best candidates? How much are they paying them? How are they incentivizing them? What are their learnings? The franchisor certainly has all the job profiles that you can post online. And so, again, it's kind of a tag team. Ultimately, the decision is still yours and it's going to be your employee, but there's a whole lot of support along the way.
Okay. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know you said you don't want to sugarcoat it. Let's talk about that passive process again in terms of an actual time commit. And I know this might vary wildly, but just put some actual, tangible numbers around this. If I'm in the best case scenario or worst case scenario, I have a great manager, I have like a manager that needs a little hand holding. Am I talking I'm in there 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week? What does this actually look like off the side of your desk?
I would say in the first 3 months, maybe the first 6 months, expect to spend more time in the business. So, if you have a good manager, I'd say you're probably spending 10 hours a week. Again, and every situation's different. So I want to give that caveat, but you're probably spending about 10 hours a week early on, but that can easily move to 3 to 5 hours a week, maybe even less down the road. Again, if you have a good manager, that's what it comes down to. That really takes the business and owns it themselves. And, the better, their compensation structure, that the better the business does, the better they do. I have some clients that actually open up the cap table and give equity to these people. Like they earn equity over time. In some cases, it's just more bonuses that are tied to profit sharing or what have you. So, I personally have franchises that I'm incredibly hands-off with. And I've got a lot of clients that are in that situation. Now, the flip side is if you need to replace that guy, he's not doing a good job. You could find yourself leaning in, spending 15, 20, 25 hours a week until that business is in a good place. Sometimes even more, right? If you have to replace them and you don't have a replacement yet. So I just always want people to go in eyes wide open around that. But a good franchisor makes it much more doable because a lot of that support comes from the sidelines.
Got it. And then talking about those first, 3 months, but more like from a financial payback period, I guess it could be years. you talk about getting financing for, a certain amount of them. Let's say I have a loan, I've got royalties that you mentioned. I guess, what does it look like when you're building up? I mean, is this kind of are we expecting kind of slim margins in the beginning while you're paying back some of that financing? I guess, what is the payback period and that initial investment? I'm not articulating that well, but I think you know what I'm getting
Yeah.
at. I guess give us maybe like whatever macro level you would normally kind of say, what am I expecting from like an actual passive income based on the investment and the financing and the royalties?
Yeah, I'd say, from a positive monthly P&L standpoint, so you're now, breaking even, making money. There's certainly some that, several months out of the gate, could be 3 months that you're turning a profit. But maybe it requires very little overhead. But then there are others that, have more overhead, and you've got to create the volume to cover the overhead and then create a profit. So I'd say 6 to 9 months is fairly common. It just so much depends on the industry. It depends on, are you paying a general manager or are you the one running the business yourself? Is it a recurring revenue business? Is it more of a big ticket type business? Just a lot of different characteristics. There's certainly some where you may not turn a profit in the first year. It may be somewhere in the year 2 that you do. It just depends. But I always encourage people to be conservative in their pro formas going in. If you think it's going to take 6 months, maybe plan for 9 months. You always want some cash reserves on the sidelines. One thing I like to mention is, the idea of owning a business. You're building towards cash flows. You're building a business that's going to have exit value down the road. In all likelihood, you'll sell it to another franchisee in the system, or you can take it to the open market. But that internal M&A is very common within franchise systems. So you're building an asset, but you're also getting tax benefits. And I think oftentimes W-2 employees don't recognize that the tax code was written for business owners and real estate investors. That's what the government is incentivizing. And there's just so many things you can do as a business owner from a write-off standpoint, or from a QBI, qualified business income. I nerd out on this stuff, so I can talk about taxes all day. But there's so many things that as a business owner that you can do, especially say you have a spouse that's a W-2. There's ways to offset a lot of their income through things that you're doing in the business. So, I call it the trifecta: the cash flows, the asset appreciation, plus the tax piece. So you can need to kind of look at it all in one.
Got it. Ooh, so much around this process for sure, but I know we're running close to time. I want to ask one last piece about, you'd mentioned the idea that you could probably just buy into a more mature franchise versus starting your own. Do you have a recommendation there for people who are kind of jumping in?
I get calls every day from people that are looking for existing businesses, and franchise or non-franchise. They say, hey, here's how the conversation goes. Hey, Jon, I've been looking for an existing business for the past 4 years. I've been under LOI 5 times. The due diligence didn't shake out. We couldn't negotiate the price. Something was found, during discovery. Over and over. An existing business can be great, but it's also a needle in a haystack, is what I see out there. Within franchising, it's even more of a needle in a haystack, because most franchises get bought by other franchisees in the system. I just had a client in Salt Lake City last week sell a restoration company to another franchisee in the system. That's how most of them are handled. So they never come to market. So if you're coming from the outside, it's a long shot. Once you get in the franchise system and you become a franchisee, that growth over time through organically acquiring can definitely be doable. But one thing that people realize, they've been looking for businesses for a long time. Even if they find a good business to buy, there's inherent risk to that. They like the idea that's already cash flowing and it's awareness in the market and you've got a team in place. But whenever you have a change in ownership, there's going to be some upheaval. You're going to lose some key employees. You may lose key customers. And here you paid a premium for that existing business. So many of those searchers, if you will, come to us and say, maybe franchising makes more sense because it's a proven business. I may have to put a little more effort in on the front end, but I'm not paying a premium for it. And I'm able to put my thumbprints on the culture from day one. And so, there are trade-offs both ways, but more and more people are turning to the franchise route.
Got it. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much. This was an action-packed conversation. We got a lot in there, but I really appreciate you being open with your insight. And I think if anyone is interested, or they had even the seed of interest, this is a great educational session on what is the process to move into the franchise world. Before we close up, I'd love to just offer you the floor for a minute and kind of tell our audience how people find you. If you are interested after this conversation, what are you offering? What is a good way to connect?
Yeah, again, it's entirely free to work with us. So happy to jump on the phone with any of your listeners. Happy to share a copy of our book, Non-Food Franchising. Reach out on our website, franbridgeconsulting.com. That's FRAN bridgeconsulting.com. And yeah, share your email address. We'll reach out to you with a link to the calendar, as well as links to download the book. If you'd rather purchase the book online, you can buy it through Amazon or any other retailer, and all proceeds go to Hope International, a great nonprofit that we support. So that's another good avenue for acquiring it too. But the book is 90 pages. We cover a lot of content in that span, and a lot of our clients have read it by the time we get on the phone. It's just a good primer to kind of get the juices flowing and help fill in the gaps in understanding.
Amazing. All right. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. And for those of you listening, thanks for tuning into the Process Lab. We'll talk to you all next time.